Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of Driving the Line. This is the trucking podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. I'm Kenny Ray, one of your three hosts, along with two of my colleagues, Mr. Mike Bohan, Mr. Jim Seibert. And we're going to visit with you today just a little bit about safety, not only traffic safety, but safety in general during the holiday periods. And we're coming up on that period of between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then it all just kind of merges into New Year's. And we want to share a little bit of our philosophies and our thoughts with you about remaining safe during the holiday period. I'm going to start. I want to tell you a real quick story, a true story. It's a very somber story. Christmas Day of 1988. And I know that seems like a long, long time ago, but it's still very fresh in my memory, and I'll tell you why. I was a young Texas highway patrolman, and I was assigned to work that day, the day shift, Christmas Day. And surprisingly, the actual day of a holiday, of a major holiday, tends to be relatively light traffic. The heavy traffic are the days leading up to the holiday and the days immediately following. So on Christmas Day itself, most everybody's already at grandma's house, or they're home, they're wherever they're wanting to be. So traffic is relatively light. And we kind of had a philosophy back then in the Texas Highway Patrol that, hey, it's Christmas Day. If you stop somebody, unless they're doing something just terribly wrong, let's write them a warning, wish them Merry Christmas, and don't be out making a lot of people mad on Christmas Day. And I remember the day well. It was a very pretty day. I'm down in Texas, and so we don't have harsh winters down here. It was actually a very pleasant day, very pretty day. And I received a wreck call over the radio on Interstate 20, told me the milepost. I still remember where it was, 527 eastbound, Interstate 20. And as I was headed that way, the dispatcher came back with a little more information, said it was going to be a one-vehicle rollover. And when I got to the scene, I couldn't see a car. There were a bunch of cars stopped, but I couldn't see a rollover car. And so I got out, and then I looked, and it was down in a creek bed. The vehicle had come off of the interstate, and it rolled multiple times, and it was on its roof in a creek bed. And then I could see beside the vehicle, there was a person on the ground. And at first, it was very surrealistic, because here's a car that's upside down in a creek. There's a person that used to be alive, that no longer was, laying on the bank of this creek, and there were Christmas presents scattered everywhere, just everywhere. And I'll jump ahead and tell you, it was a young nurse. She still had her nursing uniform on. She had just left her job in Dallas. She had worked all night the night before as a floor nurse on one of the large hospitals in Dallas. And she was eastbound on Interstate 20, and at the time, that's all we got her Texas driver's license out of her purse, and it had an address in Dallas. Now, this was 1988. The reason I tell you that, we didn't have cell phones back then. The seatbelt laws were just kind of coming into their infancy in terms of being enforced, and the speed limit back then was 55 miles an hour. And there was a truck driver there at the scene, and he came over to me, and he said, she was in front of me, and I saw what happened. And he told me that she was not speeding. She was just driving a regular speed, and that he saw her tires get off of the pavement. And he said, I don't know if, again, no cell phones back then. So texting we hadn't even heard that term, didn't even know what it was. And he said, I don't know if she was sleepy. I don't know if she was reaching for something. I don't know. But he said her tires got off the pavement. She overcorrected. And when she did, it started rolling. And he said, I don't know how many times it rolled. He said, all I could see was presents flying out of her car. She was not wearing a seatbelt because it threw her out. And ultimately, that is what ended up killing her. Now, I want to tell you what happened after that real briefly. Okay. Again, no cell phones. So I had to call on a radio and get a trooper out of the Dallas, Texas office to go to this address that was on this young lady's driver's license. He goes to an apartment in Dallas. There's no one there. We later found out that she was not married. She lived alone. She was a young woman. And so he ended up waking up the apartment manager or getting the apartment manager to come out. Now, remember, this is Christmas Day, okay? So the apartment manager then pulled up the lease agreement and tried to find this person's emergency contact, and we get a name and a telephone number. We call, the trooper in Dallas calls that number, and it ends up being this young lady's supervisor, another nurse at the hospital where she worked. And we said, we're trying to track down her family. And her nursing supervisor said, all I know is she's from Louisiana. I don't know anything about her family. We will have to get HR to get her emergency contact through the hospital. Keep in mind, this is Christmas Day. Have you ever tried to get an HR person on Christmas Day? We finally did, and got hold of her emergency contact, which at that point ended up being her parents, her mom and dad. Now, again, no cell phones, okay? So by now, all of this is taking a long time to track all these people down. And finally, I get the name and the phone number of her parents, a little bitty small rural town in North Louisiana. We don't make death notifications by phone. And so I went to the Highway Patrol office that I worked out of, and I called the Louisiana State Police out of Bossier City, Louisiana. And I got a trooper on the phone. And the first words out of his mouth, he said, when the Texas Highway Patrol calls me on Christmas Day, he said, it's never, ever good. And then I remember what he said. He said, I hate getting these kinds of calls, because he knew what I was fixing to ask him to do. And that trooper physically drove out to the home where this young lady that I had just seen a body laying in a creek in Texas gets out there, and they've got a full-blown family Christmas going on. There are 10 or 20 cars parked in the yard. There are kids running around. They've got Christmas music playing loud. And this Louisiana State Trooper has to walk up and knock on a door and tell a mama and a daddy that their daughter has been killed in Texas in a car wreck on Christmas Day. So what started out as family, fun, and celebration ended up a family in North Louisiana planning a funeral. And more importantly not more importantly than that, but just to tell you the long-term consequences or the ramifications of these sorts of deals, forever and ever and ever in that family's mind, Christmas Day will represent the day that their daughter, their loved one, their sister, their aunt, whatever relationship in that family, Christmas will always bring back memories of that day, of them opening the front door and a Louisiana State Trooper standing on their front porch. Now, I start our podcast today with that story because as a team, Mike, Jim, and I want to set the precedent that safety during the holiday can't take a holiday. We've still got to be attentive to what we do, because there are changes in traffic volumes. There are people driving who are impaired. There are people driving who are distracted. The best we could ever tell about this young lady, because we didn't have any witnesses other than the truck driver that saw her run off of the road, the best we can tell, she had worked a nursing shift all night the night before at a hospital, taking care of patients. She got in her car directly from the hospital, already had it loaded with all the presents, and she was driving home to North Louisiana to be with her family. And our guess, and it's purely a guess, it's purely speculation, was that she was tired, she was sleepy, she was fatigued. This happened about 7:30 in the morning. And but the point is, we've got people that are driving that are distracted. We got people driving that are drowsy. Now, I'm in Texas, and I told y'all it was a pretty day that day, but Mike lives in Missouri, and Jim lives in Oklahoma, and we've got listeners to the podcast that live all over the country. We always run the risk during the holiday season of having winter weather. So we're kind of starting the podcast because this is truck related. We're starting talking about driving safety, but there's other things that go on as well during the holiday season. It's an uptick in cargo thefts. We worry about our families, our spouses, our kids that are either going shopping or on the road. And we just kind of want to visit with y'all today about those various sorts of things. So Mike and Jim, I start off with that story, not to make everybody sad, but to make the point that what an absolute appearance of contradiction it is for a family to be all geared up for a holiday celebration, and then within a matter of seconds of opening a door, how catastrophically their entire world can change and come unraveled at the drop of a hat, all because of a momentary lapse in judgment, a momentary lapse in attentiveness, or whatever, dealing with an automobile or an 18-wheeler or truck going down the highway. So, guys, share with me your thoughts on that.
Well, Ken, as you were telling that story, which is just sobering, but when I think about what happened to that young lady, and I think about all of the listeners we've got out there, the men and women who are driving trucks and they do this for a living, I kind of apply that situation to them. I mean, they're out on the road all year long. They don't see their families as much as a lot of folks do. When the holidays roll around, like that picture you painted, that's typically going to be a happy time of year. They're going to want to get home to see their families, things like that. And that's when, if you're trying to get home for a Thanksgiving type holiday with your family, or it's Christmas time, as a driver, you don't want to push the limit. You don't want to say, yeah, I'm out of hours, or maybe I'm not out of hours, but I'm just tired, but I'm going to keep pushing because I want to get home. I haven't seen my kids for a couple of weeks, or I need to get home, see my spouse. And as you said it's this season, this holiday season, is no time to take a break or take a holiday from being safe on the road and doing what we know is right and making those right decisions. And it just, I mean, you could tell that story 100 times, and I don't think it's going to be any less impactful to me. It's just something that it's that time of year is supposed to be about family. It's supposed to be about happy memories and just time spent well, with family and friends. And it can get so easily wiped away with a situation like this. And when we're talking to truck drivers, we're talking to trucking companies, I think it's important that we make sure our drivers know. One, I think it's important to, if a driver has something they want to get back for, something like that we really work with them and try to get them back where they don't feel like they're rushing to get back. But I think it's something that we need to talk about with them, and the companies out there need to talk with their drivers when they have safety meetings, because this could easily be the story of a truck driver.
No doubt. Yeah,
easily.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's a sad story. And I hate that young woman lost her life so many years ago. But it changed that family forever, I'm sure. And it could just so easily, we could be talking about, one of our clients or one of the people we know that drive trucks. And obviously we don't ever want anybody to lose their life in any situation like this. But I think it's something that I'm glad we're discussing today, because it's important just to bring up with the drivers before that season gets there, because we don't want to push. We don't want to, because it's going to come both ways. It's going to come, they're going to push, try to get home to things, and then they're going to be home. And I don't know if you guys are like me, but usually after, whether it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever, you get together with family, you spend a few days, you eat way too much food, and you're just about wore out when the little holiday get together is over. And then these folks are going to jump right back in a truck and take off again. So then there's a fatigue issue on the back end of this holiday as well. So it's a really important conversation to have, I think.
And and Jim, I'm gonna segue to you here in just a second, and you're gonna see how. But Mike and I both come out of the enforcement community, and most of our listeners know Jim was an officer in the U.S. Army, so he was constantly supervising young soldiers, and so all of us have been in roles where we've had responsibilities for other people. And normally when you think about holiday safety and in terms of traffic, we're talking about impaired driving. We think about, in Texas, we still use the term DWI, driving while intoxicated. We think about drunk driving, if you will. And clearly in the story I shared, that did not come into play at all. I mean, we think this young lady was just fatigued. But for us, because our audience is primarily the trucking industry, we don't want to miss the opportunity to distress. And we're not going to just sit here and preach about it, because there's not a truck driver on this planet that doesn't know how consequential it can be for his or her career, whether they're in an 18-wheeler or whether they're in their personal car or they're on a motorcycle. If they get a DWI or DUI, it completely changes the ability for them to even make a living, because it has an impact on their driver's license. And Jim, for those of us that were never in the military, we've all watched movies about the service and where young soldiers get in trouble or in jail, and their commanding officer comes down to the local jail to get them out of jail. And it usually was alcohol related in some way. It may have been a driving incident. They got in a fight at a bar or something. And I'm not trying to stereotype soldiers, but the point I'm making is all three of us, the host of the podcast, we've all dealt in the past with the consequences of mixing alcohol or drugs and then operating a motor vehicle, whether that's a commercial motor vehicle, passenger car, or motorcycle. And we just want to stress to our truck drivers on that listen to our podcast and our safety directors, one of our focus has to be during the holiday season on safety is that we never, ever, ever let our guard down in terms of drawing that hard line in the sand that we simply are not going to operate a vehicle of any kind if we've been drinking. For the states that allow recreational use of marijuana, if you've been doing that, whatever, the impaired driving consequences for a truck driver are just almost beyond our ability to describe. How it can completely destroy your career. You simply won't be able to be a truck driver anymore.
Yeah, and Kenny, I just want to tag on that real quick, Jim, and you tag off. But that marijuana thing is something that I've run into that several times just in the industry where, it's recreationally legal now in a lot of states, and it's not just the impairment part of it. There's a lot of times drivers will think, well, I can do this, have this gummy, smoke this joint, whatever, on the weekend, and be fine because I won't be under the influence when I'm driving. But that stays in your system. You get pulled for a random, and now you're facing that issue with a positive random test, and that's very detrimental to your career as well, because you may be doing something that for the general public is legal, but as a truck driver, we have to know that's something that, if you come back for the holidays, and I'm not making any judgments or whatever, but if that stuff's going around at a party you're at or you're at a gathering, just know you can't partake and then just think all is well 2 days later and get back in the truck and go, because if you get pulled for a random, that's going to be a positive test, and it's going to affect your career in a major way.
Yeah. So you guys just visiting there for the first part, it made me think of an old principle of implied versus applied pressure. And let's just talk as family members, if you get married, then you get multiple families, you got your folks and your in-laws, and Christmas can look different for everybody in these holiday seasons like Thanksgiving or Easter. They've all got their own, family traditions, and the implied pressure or the passive comment from a family member can place pressure maybe in your subconscious that, hey, I've got to get there. I got to make the rounds. I got to haul the family. We got to have a massive logistic effort to make all of the rounds in the short period of time where I've got off for vacation time or over this holiday break from work. And that go mentality versus the applied pressure of, you're going to be here and you're going to be here for Christmas time at this time. And the stressors that we can just receive from family or from a spouse or from the kids, they're real. And unless we're addressing it and really putting a plan in place, we can be running down the interstate with a vehicle full of presents, with our mind not on it. Just, I need to get there as soon as I can get there. So that's a thought that came into my head. How do we minimize those pressures, whether implied or applied? And that's going to start with just our plan going into the season and communicating it on the front side, with a significant other. Hey, this is what we can do, and this is what we can't. Mike, you said sometimes you need a vacation from a vacation. Let's just get the stars to align here. Let's say we've felt these pressures. We're finally getting everywhere we're going to go. We got back to the house and we feel like a kicked dog, and we're going back to work all of a sudden. Some of the most successful returns to work that I've had, where I come back with a fresh mind and rested after a vacation, is I build that day at home. At the end, there's going to be a recovery day before I get back into it, where my mind's got to be sharp. It's a decompression. It was nice to see the entire family and get around and take part in those festivities. But now it's rest. It's my Sunday before Monday type thing. So all that was good. What a sombering story that you shared there, Kenny, of that young nurse with a vehicle full of presents. I'm not sure I'll ever get that picture out of my mind. And that's probably a good thing as we're coming into these holidays, that I keep that there and fresh. So the military side, one of our company or state safety officers used to say that training to take lives, right? That's what the United States uniformed service does. We are training to take lives, is not worth losing a life in training. And when I think of our winter driver training, I was a commander of a trucking company. We would shift dates sometimes around that November, December timeframe of trying to align with inclement weather. And I don't know why, besides maybe we're just training with the op tempo of we're in war. But there is a significant lack of sleep, significant lack of downtime, rest, and recovery. And we're asking soldiers to get out on the roads. And we had training areas. If we had ice and snow and things like that, we're not driving on the roads with the common public. We are at a training facility. The military operates on caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, and hate. That's kind of the motto. How many truck drivers can push that limit and operating on caffeine and nicotine? And we're hoping not alcohol and hate. But when we start adding some of these substances, and it's a daily routine, and it can be an addiction, absolutely. You mix that with some poor rest, poor decisions are made, and our reaction times are slowed. And that was one thing that was very, very evident to us when we were doing our driver qualification scenarios in wintertime driving, that recoverable incidents, how to correct, where our path that we're taking through the snow or through the ice, those decisions became a lot slower, and we had more incidents where we need to bring a wrecker in to pull somebody back up on a ditch. Those are just things that popped in my head while you guys were talking. Did I say anything that sparked any interest from you guys?
I like the fact that y'all would intentionally try to train when there was bad weather. Most truck drivers don't get that opportunity. They encounter the bad weather, and that's their training experience, and it is out on a public highway with the public. There's a lot of truck drivers that are veterans, and I always appreciate the military applications you make, not just because we're all very patriotic, support our military, but there's so many things that the military does by intentional that have very good applications over into the trucking world, particularly the studies y'all do on how people respond when they're fatigued, when they're hungry, when they're pushed to the limit. And so we know how the human body reacts in that, and we can make applications of that in the trucking industry that normally the outcomes of those aren't good. And fortunately, the military does it in controlled environments, knowing we may have to encounter this in war. So how are our soldiers going to respond? And then we know we can apply those principles to the trucking industry and say, guys, when you're tired, when you're hungry, when you're to the point where the body is just flat shutting down, when you're driving in inclement weather, the outcomes of those are not going to be good unless you take some kind of measures to counteract the effect of that. So I always appreciate when you share those thoughts from the military, and the fact, you were an officer of a transportation company. The things you did there are just as applicable to our world as anything else. So I'm always grateful when you share those. Mike, go ahead. You had a comment.
No, I was just going to jump in on, you guys had both mentioned, and Jim was talking about the inclement weather, and you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Kenny, that we've got listeners all over the United States, and they're up where I live. They always talk about a white Christmas and all this stuff, and you guys don't get that. Maybe, I don't know. Have you ever had a white Christmas down there, Kenny? I don't know.
I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in Texas my whole life, and it's never snowed on Christmas Day in my state, where I live at least.
And for us up here, one year it could be, 50 some degrees and sunny and nice, and the next year you got 3 feet of snow. You just never know up here. And so there's when you add in all those things Jim was talking about, the fatigue, the stressors, everything, and then put potentially on maybe some of the worst roads you're going to see throughout the year as far as the weather goes, it is a recipe for disaster. So I just greatly appreciate what you were sharing there, Jim. It's so applicable to our listeners, just to understand what they're up against that time of year and how to prepare themselves going into the holiday season. I think it was extremely applicable.
And guys, I want to touch real briefly on two additional things that have to do with the holidays. We have a lot of safety directors and even the owners of trucking companies that listen to the podcast, and we're so grateful for that. We never take our listeners for granted, and we're genuinely humbled and appreciative of every one of you that tune into these podcasts. But for our safety directors and for the owners of trucking companies, you need to be aware that during the holiday season, cargo thefts go up exponentially. And part of the reason for that is drivers will get as close as they can to home, and they may still be in the truck. And you may not have a yard in the area where they live, and they'll end up dropping a trailer at a truck stop somewhere and bobtailing home. And I don't know how many times when I was a state trooper, I would make loops through truck stops just to keep an eye on things during the holiday season. There would just be tons of semi-trailers just lined up out there with no tractor under them at all. And that represents two things to a thief. Number one, if they have access to a tractor, they simply can back under your trailer and be gone with the whole thing. And they also can just sit there in the car and watch that trailer for 2 or 3 hours and do surveillance and basically realize it is unattended, and then come out there in the dead of night and take bolt cutters and cut the lock of it off or whatever and steal whatever's in the trailer. So the theft of high dollar electronics, the theft of food items, all of that stuff tends to go up. So I'm just simply sharing that to let our safety directors and our owners know, hey, this is the time of the year that happens a lot. So, whether you've got tracking devices on trailers or you want to send a memo out to the drivers, hey, have your spouse come down and pick you up at the truck stop, leave that tractor under that trailer, don't bobtail home. But just a thought, and we never meddle in the business of our clients trying to tell them what to do, but we do want to make you aware that it's one other item that the safety directors and owners need to at least have in the back of their mind. And then the last topic I want to touch on, I'm just going to mention it, and then I'm going to punt to my two co-hosts, is the personal safety of family members. We've got these truck drivers that are out working. A lot of them are trying to get home for the holidays. And I'm going to be stereotypical here for just a moment, if you'll bear with me. But let's say it's a male driver, and let's say he's married and got a family. So he's pushing, he's 7, 8, 10 states away from home, and he's trying to get home. So we've been talking about how to keep him safe on the road. And yet his wife and his kids are going to the mall, they're going shopping, they're cooking at the house, they've got friends over, they're in the holiday spirit, and yet they're operating in an environment where their guard is down, both in terms of their driving safety when they're running around town, and also in terms of their personal safety. When they go to a mall and then they walk in, and there are bad people out there in the world now that want to hurt folks and want to steal stuff. So, guys, and both of y'all are family men, and Jim, you've still got relatively young children at home. So what are some thoughts y'all would share with our listeners about how these truck drivers can share things with their family members about keeping them safe until he or she gets home and reassumes that role as head of the household?
Well, I'm feeling a little bit ashamed about this, but, when I lived up in Nebraska and I lived up in Wisconsin, our emergency winter kit was fully stocked and available inside of our vehicle. It would have some batteries, some lights, maybe a candle back in the day, some blankets, and yes, there were some MREs in the vehicle, some bottles of water. But I'm here in north central Oklahoma right now, but Mike brought up the point. It's like, we don't know from winter to winter what we're going to get. Are we going to get a massive ice storm and it's going to knock down power lines and it's going to just coat the road and you're driving on a sheet of glass, which is worse in many instances, more than just snowpack. But down here, I haven't built that yet. I haven't put that back in the car. But those, as far as over the road trips, and when we're driving back home for me into Nebraska or into Missouri for my wife's family, just having things available in the vehicle for in case of emergency, keeping one phone might be running for the Bluetooth in the vehicle and trickling the battery while the other one is not getting played with, just so we've got a source of communication if we need it. Things of that nature. And as far as my family out and about, I know that there's evil in this world that wants to prey on what are perceived weak or soft targets. And I just know that my family and we have prepared and we have trained and we talk about situations, and my wife chuckles every time we go into a restaurant of how I like to sit and where I like to sit, and that I point out to the kids, there's an exterior exit door right there. That's the first place we go. I don't care if it says, don't use this door, alarm will sound. If we need to get out, let's let the alarm ring. We don't care. But not getting into all the details of how we do that, but that's my mindset when we're moving out there and being amongst a population where I don't know their intentions. I just know that I don't want them to see us as an easy target, regardless of whether I've got my two kids with me or not.
I can't agree with what you said anymore, Jim. I really don't have anything to add there. We're very similar. I think with everything we're talking about today, whether it's our drivers out on the road, Kenny mentioned the safety directors and owners, the family members of the folks that are out there on the road. It's just a matter of continuing to be diligent and make right decisions every day. And that doesn't matter if it's the middle of May or if we're in the holiday seasons, whatever. We've got to continue making right decisions. As Jim was talking through some of the things he does with his family there, I kept thinking, it's you fall back to how's that, Jim? You fall back to your greatest level of training. It's like in a situation, it's like you're gonna whatever you've been trained to do, whatever you've learned, that's where you're going to go to in situations where things might not be ideal, whether it's a truck driver out on the road or a family member having an issue. So I think we've got to talk about those issues, whether it's with your family, whether it's a company with their drivers. And again, just continue to be diligent and make good, strong decisions all the way throughout the year, including the holiday season.
Yeah, we like to use the term situational awareness, where you're constantly aware of what's going on around you. And I don't know how many times I've seen people, and I'm not just going to say ladies, I've seen men do this too, come out of a grocery store, come out of a convenience store, come out of a mall, and y'all all know what they're doing. They're looking at their phone. They're walking just robotically. They've got both arms full of sacks or packages or boxes or whatever they bought in the store. And I've literally seen them wander out in the parking lot and then pause and start looking around. And then you're sitting there saying, they don't even know where their car is. They don't even know if they're on the right row or not. And then y'all have all seen them. They'll hold their key up and start hitting the button, hoping their car horn will honk so they can find their car. And so
start listening for the horn.
You've got people that are completely unaware of what's going on. And I'm going to tell y'all, as an old retired cop, there are people that watch folks like that and say, that is my easy target. I'm fixing to grab her purse. I'm fixing to grab his sack. I'm fixing to grab his car keys, and that car is going to be mine. I'm fixing to take what he's worked for and paid for, and I'm going to acquire it through brute force. And so I would just encourage, as we close, and we're closing this episode, but I would just encourage all of our listeners, part of what you want to share with your family over the holiday periods is this simple phrase of situational awareness. Just be aware of what's going on while you're driving, while you're walking, while you're shopping, while you're at a restaurant with your family. Just put that stupid phone down and be aware of what's going on around you at any one time. So we're going to close. Mike, Jim, anything y'all want to add before we do close out this episode? We're good? Okay. I'm getting nods from both of my coworkers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us on this episode of Driving the Line. We are the podcast that's always in the pursuit of safety, and we do wish you the happiest times over the holidays. But the main thing, we want you to come back in 2024 as one of our listeners, and we want you to be safe during that holiday period. And so the last thing I want to leave you with, none of you listening to this podcast want to hear a knock on the door and open it and have a state trooper standing on your front porch, because I can promise you that news is never, ever good. Y'all be safe. Thank you for joining us.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.